Senator David Leyonhjelm joins me now. Welcome, Senator.
Good afternoon.
Now, you're not seriously suggesting South Australia and Tasmania should leave the Federation, are you?
Oh, there's a bit of rhetoric involved. Parliament is a natural forum for a bit of rhetoric. I was making a very serious point, of course, that South Australia and Tasmania both receive a substantially greater share of GST revenue per head of population than the other states. So I was making a serious point, but leaving the Federation was just a sort of a bit of hyperbole.
But I mean, isn't that the role of government to take GST revenue and put it in places that need it? I mean, obviously to keep health systems, education systems, infrastructure kind of uniform around Australia. I mean, has been a formula for GST sharing and it has worked.
I don't know that it's safe to say it's worked. It hasn't blown up in anybody's face over the period it's been running. But its name is called horizontal fiscal equalisation, and it's a national welfare system for the state governments. And what it leads to is poor governance, quite frankly. And I'll just give you one example of that poor governance. In South Australia, 12.9%, well, this is figures from a bit over a year ago, but 12.9% of people employed in South Australia are employed in the public sector. Now, Victoria, which also has a Labor government and still has a Labor government, in fact, that figure is just 9%. Now, I'm not suggesting Victoria is particularly well governed. I think it could be a lot lower than that. From the Liberal Democrats' point of view, a much, much lower figure. But the fact that one is 13 or nearly 13%, one is 9%, is very significant. The public sector is much, much bigger in South Australia as a proportion of the total economy. That's a reflection of the type of governance that you've had in that state for quite a few years.
What's the remedy, though, to sack a lot of public servants and have them pile into cities like Melbourne and Sydney that are already overcrowded, Senator? I mean, it's Business SA have been on here saying similar things, but what's the remedy?
Well, small government, basically, get out of the way and make it easy for the private sector to do well. So that means all sorts of things, taxes on the government, on the private sector, of course, and that's a function of the government you have. It also is red tape and green tape. You have all sorts of rules and regulations, things that are really unnecessary in South Australia, which there's less of. Now, I'm not saying the other states are good. I don't go that far and say the other states are good. I think they're all over-regulated. But South Australia is over-regulated. An example, of course, is your very high electricity prices. They are a function of the decisions made by the South Australian government. And that it isn't necessary if the objective was to make it easy for businesses to do business in South Australia, which I think should be an aspiration, then you wouldn't be jacking up electricity prices. That's just one of many other issues.
I'm talking to Senator David Leyonhjelm. We're talking about his claims that maybe there should be a Brexit, which he said was try and get some attention in Parliament, where states like South Australia and Tasmania are having too much of a disproportionate proportion from the Federation. Just quickly, but by saying a Brexit, though, that's pretty inflammatory. I'm looking at our text line now, Senator. I mean, you're not going to make friends in South Australia or Tasmania with those sort of comments, you realise?
Oh, I don't know. There are plenty of people in South Australia who would agree with me, perhaps not a majority, but for a small party, I tell my people, if 10% vote for us, it doesn't really matter if 90% don't much what I say.
I mean, South Australia, it gets shafted in terms of the water that comes down from the Murray. There's a huge focus on eastern states to kind of pick on smaller states like South Australia and Tasmania. People would love jobs in the private sector, but they are drying up. They do rely, yes, on some extra GST, but if, say, uranium was to open up as a market, we would, be getting less GST, Senator. So, it's all swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
No, it's not really. I mean, we do have a problem with our federation, though. I mean, I wouldn't like South Australians, unless they particularly voted for politicians who like regulating business to the point where it's not they're not competitive. I don't want them to take it personally, but you have been pretty poorly governed, and there are lots and lots of opportunities in which the South Australian government could do better for business, and the Liberal Democrats' policy on this is, in fact, for the Commonwealth government to not fund the state governments at all.
Oh, well, that was my next question.
Okay,
well, you know, so then we wouldn't have this competition for GST revenue. Money would just go where. So you're saying state governments are redundant in your view?
No. What I'd like is to see is the state governments regain the power of taxing. So they would also have the capacity to tax, well, however they liked, income tax if they like, company tax if they like, whatever. And they would only be able to spend the money that they raise themselves. So they'd be responsible for balancing their own budget, both in terms of revenue and expenditure. And the Commonwealth government under our policy, would be able to halve income tax quite easily. And as a result, there would be plenty of room then for the state governments to levy their own taxes and live within their means. If they didn't live within their means, then of course they would run up deficits. They would be accountable for the electorate.
Wouldn't you have different standards of living in every state if you did that? I mean, isn't the idea to have a uniform kind of standard of living across the country?
I don't think that we achieve that by the horizontal fiscal equalisation. The only argument where you might be able to say, well, people would seriously be out of pocket if we didn't have that, because of, as what you're talking about, would be Northern Territory, which of course does receive far more per head, but there are special circumstances up there. But even then, I think ultimately Northern Territory should stand on its own feet too.
All right, Senator, we're about to talk to Shane Wright. Be interested to get his view. He's the economics editor of the Western Australian. If you'd like to comment on this, 1300 222 891. The Senator has said that South Australia relies on a interstate welfare through its GST, that it's got too high a proportion of public servants, and that's due to the way we've been governed. Shane has called on 1300 222 891. Welcome, Shane.
Hello.
What would you like to say?
I was just wondering, we've got the instance that Senator Leyonhjelm was talking about, the percentage of public service. I'm just sort of wondering whether that's actually in direct correlation with our demographics, i.e. we have an older population. Our young adults tend to leave for the eastern states. So we've got a pretty large, as a percentage of the economy, burden on education and on health, and that's probably reflected in those statistics.
All right, Shane, I'll take that as a comment. Thank you for that. Shane Wright is the economics editor of the West Australian. He joins me now. Welcome, Shane.
G'day, Jules. How are you?
Western Australians have often thought that they own the iron ore and all the minerals in the ground, and they've been funding the rest of Australia and getting shafted by the GST. 47 cents in the dollar. Surely the David Leyonhjelm's statement about interstate welfare would be music to the ears of Westerners?
Well, it got down to 30 cents in the dollar.
Okay. What do you think?
Doesn't a government economy went into recession? So
doesn't a government redistribute income? I mean, isn't that the job? It's not to divide it up evenly, is it?
No, and that's the. If you go back to the original constitution, Western Australia was given special payments, in part due to the introduction of tariffs, and so the original constitution and there were payments made to Western Australia, and Western Australia was a mendicant state up until about 2005.
Right.
So, and that has changed over time. Remember, South Australia was a much more important economy than Western Australia up until around the 1960s. So there are changes through time that partly come down to the natural attributes of a state or territory and whether they can be exploited, which is AKA mining, iron ore, and now you're seeing a lithium take off in WA as well.
So has South Australia had it too good for too long? Are we relying on interstate welfare and public service money to keep us afloat, Shane?
I'm not sure about the public service money, because this goes to an issue that is why we have horizontal fiscal equalisation. And if you want to see HFE non-existent, then you go to the United States, where a child born in Alabama has much different health outcomes and life outcomes than one born, say, in California or one born in New Jersey. Australia has made a policy decision, right? No, if you are a child born or you're a sick person in one part of the country, then you will get a comparable level of service and or education. That's
the aim.
That is the aim of HFE. The question comes down to how it's achieved and whether there are incentives from the current system that are perverse. Now, the funny thing is the Productivity Commission report that has driven much of this actually found they can't find the evidence that HFE has led to perverse policy outcomes, even though theoretically they should be. They just can't find them, and that's part of the problem in this whole argument.
All right, we'll go to a couple of calls, and we'll go back to Senator David Leyonhjelm, who's listening. Nigel has called on 1300 222 891. Welcome, Nigel.
Hello.
What would you like to say about Brexit or the GST revenue?
Just thinking about the Senator's proposal that the states be allowed to raise their own revenues. Wouldn't that mean that the larger states, just through the economics of scale, would be able to increase their advantage just by taxing less, and we end up in a race to the bottom?
Okay, all right. Thank you for that, Nigel. I'll put that to Senator Leyonhjelm very soon. But Anthony Penny is also called from Business SA. Anthony, welcome.
Good afternoon, Jules. It's a very interesting topic, and your previous speaker from WA has got it bang on. The whole premise behind horizontal fiscal equalisation is that it provides a level of service consistent across the board. Now, a lot of this came about, the system has existed for a long time.
Do you agree with it, Anthony, quickly?
Do I agree with what Senator Leyonhjelm said?
Yeah.
No, definitely not. No. the Tasmania and South Australia are, yes, there have been instances where the government hasn't been as efficient as it could. But at the same time, the previous Labor government encouraged exploration of onshore gas reserve, which some of the other states haven't. It is all about the capacity to raise revenue. South Australia has a lower population as well as an older population, which means there's not as many people in the workforce. And HFE takes that into consideration.
All right. Well, I want to go back to Senator Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm. It seems the overwhelming feeling, Senator, that under your plan, South Australia raises its own taxes, we end interstate welfare, that there will be haves and have-nots in Australia, and surely that can't be good.
I don't accept the argument that Alabama children, for example, as the example used, are inherently disadvantaged because they don't have horizontal fiscal equalisation. What we would have, of course, under the system that I've described, where each state raises their own money, is competition between the states to retain people, to improve the economy in their state and outcompete.
But South Australia has an older population, not as many taxpayers as, say, in Victoria and New South Wales, so that's going to really hurt a state like South Australia, this system.
Well, it depends on the quality of its government. The horizontal fiscal equalisation disguises poor government. Now, let me give you a few examples. You've got a ban on uranium mining, uranium exploration. You've got a ban currently on storage of radioactive waste. You've got a ban on fracking. You've got this government policy in relation to renewable energy. Now, there's plenty more. Now,
but do you think that if, like WA, obviously, have people would say, that they raise a lot of GST through their mining boom, but it's not their government that has put minerals into the ground, Senator?
No, but there are plenty of minerals in Queensland, there are plenty of minerals in New South Wales and Victoria, and there are plenty of minerals in South Australia, as you know, as well as Western Australia. The only state that could really argue that they're a bit hard done by a lack of minerals would be Tasmania. But
you've described them as a beggar state too, Senator.
Yes, they are. They are a bigger state. They have other attributes, though.
Okay. Well, you're not getting a lot of love, Senator Leyonhjelm, for calling us a beggar state. You realise that?
Oh, well, look, you've got to distinguish between the rhetoric and, calling them a beggar state is intended to make a point. You don't have to regard that as a personal insult.
All right, thank you, David Leyonhjelm, Liberal Democrat Senator. Let's end with Shane Wright, Economics Editor at the Western Australian. Shane, we are redistributing the way the GST is divvied up. Do you think that's been a good idea?
Well, if you go back to when this started in 1901 and to the premiers' meetings that underpin that through that period, there are parts of this country that wouldn't have been developed without HFE. And Victoria and New South Wales have subsidised the rest of the country since Federation, and they both know that, and they both realise the country would be very different without that sort of subsidisation. And it's been a cross-subsidy for the national good as opposed to the state good. And you're really into that argument about states' rights and state benefits. I will pick up Senator Leyonhjelm there. Alabama does have much poorer health and education outcomes because they don't spend as much in that space because they don't have the income, which is where you're getting. And this has been studied in the whole lead up to the work we've had done recently in this in the PC HFE space. There's been a lot of work done in this, and there are outside of the United States you see forms of horizontal fiscal equalisation in other countries, such as Canada, such as Germany. This goes on to ensure that you get those that may not have natural resources or have very large populations spread out over small areas, and Northern Territory is a very good example. Yeah, they're very high level of Aboriginality as well. It gives you problems that need to be addressed perhaps at a national rather than a state level.
Shane Wright, thank you very much for your time as well.
Not a trouble, Squire.
All right.